Close your eyes and let your mind wander to a place where mountains touch the clouds and the sea whispers against ancient shores. Tonight, we're traveling to Albania, a small country that holds within its borders a world of natural wonder. Chapter 1. Location and Geography. Nestled in Southeast Europe, on the western edge of the Balkan Peninsula, Albania rests like a carefully placed stone in a mosaic of nations. To the northwest, Montenegro stands as its neighbor. To the northeast, Kosovo shares its border. North Macedonia touches Albania's eastern edge, while to the south, Greece extends along its frontier. But it's the western face of Albania that truly captures the imagination, where the land meets the sea in an embrace that has lasted for millennia. Imagine standing on Albania's coast, where approximately 500 kilometers of shoreline stretch along the Adriatic and Ionian seas. That's roughly 310 miles of coastline if you were to walk its length. But this isn't just any coastline. It's a tapestry of diversity, where sandy beaches give way to dramatic cliffs and hidden coves tuck themselves between rocky outcrops. The water here has witnessed the passage of civilizations, carrying ships from distant lands and reflecting the same sun that warmed the faces of ancient traders and explorers. Across these waters lie Albania's maritime neighbors. To the west, beyond the Adriatic Sea, Italy waits on the opposite shore. To the south, across the Ionian Sea, Greece extends its coastal reach. Albania sits as part of what's known as the Adriatic-Ionian region, a maritime crossroads where cultures have mingled for thousands of years. But Albania is far more than its coastline. Step inland, and you'll discover a country of remarkable contrasts. The geography here shifts and transforms like a living thing. Rugged mountains rise dramatically from the earth, their peaks cutting sharp silhouettes against the sky. Deep valleys carve through the landscape, creating pathways between highland and lowland. Limestone plateaus stretch across portions of the interior, their pale stone surfaces holding secrets of geological time. And in certain areas, fertile plains spread out, offering gentler terrain where agriculture has flourished for generations. This is a land of dramatic contrasts, where you can stand on a sun-warmed beach in the morning and climb into snow-dusted mountains by afternoon. In the northern reaches of Albania, the Albanian Alps rise like ancient sentinels. These mountains, also known by the evocative name Accursed Mountains, form part of the larger Dinaric Alp system. Here, peaks reach toward the heavens with an almost defiant majesty. The highest among them is Maja e Korabit, or Mount Korab, which climbs to approximately 2,764 meters above sea level. That's about 9,068 feet, high enough that the air grows thin and cold, and the views stretch endlessly across the Balkan landscape. Water shapes this country as much as stone does. Several important rivers thread through Albania's valleys and plains, carrying snowmelt from the mountains down toward the sea. The Drin River, with the longest drainage basin in the country, winds its way through the northern regions. The Shkumbin River flows through central Albania, historically serving as an important cultural and linguistic dividing line. The Vjosa River, one of Europe's last major wild rivers, meanders through the south, and the Osum River carves canyons and valleys as it makes its journey. These rivers aren't just geographical features. They're arteries of life, providing water for communities, power for hydroelectric generation, and pathways through otherwise difficult terrain. Albania cradles within its borders some truly remarkable lakes. In the north, Lake Škoda spreads across the landscape as the largest lake in the Balkans by surface area. Its waters extend across the border into Montenegro, shared between two nations like a liquid treaty. To the east, along the border with North Macedonia, lies Lake Ohrid, one of Europe's oldest and deepest lakes. While most of Lake Ohrid sits in North Macedonia, a portion of its ancient waters lap against Albanian shores. These lakes have existed for so long that unique species have evolved within them, creatures found nowhere else on Earth. Beneath your feet, if you were standing in Albania, lies a complex geological story. The country sits at a tectonic junction where the Adriatic plate meets the Eurasian plate. This meeting of massive crustal plates has created varied geology throughout the region. It's responsible for Albania's mountains, its valleys, and its karst landscapes. Those distinctive limestone regions where water has carved caves, sinkholes, and underground rivers over millions of years. This tectonic activity also means that Albania experiences earthquakes from time to time, a reminder that the earth beneath us is never truly still. The elevation in Albania tells a story of extremes. Along the coast, you can stand at sea level, your toes in the Adriatic or Ionian waters, feeling the gentle Mediterranean breeze. But travel inland and upward, and you'll climb through valley floors, over rolling hills, and eventually into high mountain terrain, where the landscape transforms completely. Some interior valleys and basins rest at relatively modest elevations, creating pockets of gentler terrain surrounded by towering peaks. This variation in height creates distinct ecological zones, each with its own character and life. And with such varied geography comes varied weather. Albania's climate is as diverse as its landscape. Along the coast, a Mediterranean climate prevails, bringing hot, dry summers perfect for olive groves and citrus trees, and mild, wet winters when most of the rain falls. The sea moderates temperatures here, keeping the extremes at bay. But venture into the interior mountains, and the climate shifts dramatically. Here, winters can be harsh and snowy, with cold that settles into the valleys and transforms the landscape into a white wilderness. The mountains experience more continental conditions, with greater temperature swings between seasons. Between the coast and the high peaks, countless microclimates exist, creating small pockets where conditions differ from the surrounding areas, supporting unique plant communities and agricultural traditions. This is Albania, a small country containing multitudes, a place where the Mediterranean meets the mountains, where ancient lakes reflect clouds that drift over from distant seas, where rivers carve their eternal paths toward the ocean. As you drift toward sleep, imagine standing on those varied shores, climbing those ancient peaks, or resting in a valley sheltered by mountains that have stood for millions of years. Albania waits there, in Southeast Europe, a land of remarkable geography and endless quiet beauty. Chapter 2: Early Human Presence. Let your mind drift backward through time past centuries and millennia to when the land we now call Albania was young and the first human footsteps pressed into its ancient soil. long before cities rose or nations formed, before written language captured human thoughts, people walked these lands. In the Paleolithic era, tens of thousands of years ago, hunter-gatherers moved through what is now Albania. We know they were here because they left behind their tools, fashioned from stone with patient, skillful hands. These artifacts have been discovered in various locations, particularly in the western lowlands near the Adriatic coast, where the land was more forgiving and resources more abundant. These early people lived during both the lower and middle Paleolithic periods, tracking game, gathering plants, and seeking shelter in a world vastly different from our own. Imagine them around their fires, the same stars overhead, the same mountains in the distance, but a world untamed and endless. As the ages passed and the glaciers retreated, new peoples arrived and settled. The interior valleys of Albania, with their natural corridors between mountains, became pathways for human movement. These valleys and mountain passes didn't isolate communities. Instead, they connected them, creating routes for migration and exchange across the Western Balkans. People traveled these paths for trade, for seasonal movement with their herds, and sometimes in search of new lands to call home. This mobility created a mosaic of cultural influences, a blending of traditions and ideas that would characterize the region for thousands of years to come. By the Iron Age, roughly from the 9th to the 4th centuries BCE, a distinct people had emerged in this region. They were called the Illyrians, an ancient Indo-European speaking group who made the Western Balkans their home. The Illyrian tribes settled along the Adriatic coast, where the sea offered both sustenance and connection to distant lands. They also established themselves in the inland valleys, building communities that would endure for generations. The name Illyrian itself has echoed through history, a whisper of an ancient identity that once defined these lands. The central and southern regions of what is now Albania bear the archaeological fingerprints of these Illyrian peoples. They left behind distinctive pottery, each vessel shaped by hands that knew their craft intimately. Their burial practices tell us about their beliefs, about how they honored their dead and perhaps what they thought lay beyond this life. And scattered across the landscape, particularly on defensible hilltops, they built oppida, fortified settlements that speak to both their organizational abilities and the need for protection in an uncertain world. These weren't random encampments. They were organized communities with social structures, leaders, and shared purposes. But the Illyrians didn't live in isolation. Along came the Greeks, seafaring colonists who established city-states on the Adriatic coast. One such settlement was Epidam, later known as Dyrrachium, along with places like Apollonia, which became centers of Greek culture transplanted to Illyrian shores. These Greek colonies brought with them new ideas, new technologies, new gods. The interactions between the Illyrians and these Greek settlers facilitated early cultural exchange, a meeting of worlds where trade flourished and ideas moved as freely as goods. Pottery styles merged, languages mingled, and the coast became a place where different peoples found ways to coexist and sometimes to thrive together. The Illyrians spoke their own language, distinct from Greek, distinct from Latin, part of the broader Indo-European family, but uniquely their own. While no complete Illyrian texts survive for us to read today, We catch glimpses of their tongue through inscriptions carved in stone and through names, place names and personal names that have endured, even as the language itself faded. These onomastic clues, as scholars call them, point to an Illyrian linguistic substrate that influenced later Balkan languages, leaving traces that linguists still debate and study. The exact classification of Illyrian remains uncertain, a puzzle with missing pieces, but its presence is undeniable in the echoes that remain. In the 2nd century BCE, a new power arrived from the west, the Romans, expanding their territory with characteristic determination, moved into Illyrian lands. Gradually, sometimes through diplomacy and sometimes through conquest, they integrated the Illyrian tribes into the Roman state. This wasn't merely a military occupation, it was a transformation. The Romans brought urbanization, constructing cities with forums, temples and amphitheaters. They built roads, those famous Roman roads, that connected distant provinces and allowed armies, merchants and ideas to travel with unprecedented efficiency. The region became woven into the wider Roman economy and culture. Its people becoming Roman citizens, adopting Roman customs, while maintaining threads of their Illyrian heritage. One city in particular exemplified this transformation. Dyrrhachium, the Roman name for modern Durrës, became a significant port, a gateway between East and West. Ships arrived from across the Mediterranean, carrying goods, people, and news. The city thrived on international trade, its warehouses filled with olive oil from one land, grain from another, fine pottery, metals, fabrics, all the commerce of an interconnected world. This wasn't just a Roman outpost. It was a cosmopolitan center, sustained from ancient times through the Byzantine era, a testament to the region's enduring importance in Mediterranean trade networks. As the Roman Empire evolved and eventually split, a new force began to spread through its territories: Christianity. By late antiquity, from the 4th to 6th centuries CE, the Christian faith had reached what is now Albania. Early bishoprics were established. Churches were built in coastal towns and inland areas alike. These weren't merely buildings. They represented a fundamental shift in worldview, part of the broader Roman and later Byzantine Christianization that swept across the empire. The faithful gathered in these early churches, their prayers in Latin or Greek rising toward the same sky that had sheltered Paleolithic hunters and Illyrian farmers. Today, if you were to walk through Albania with eyes trained to see the past, you would encounter layer upon layer of human occupation. In regions like Ledja, Kruja, and Shkoda, ancient ruins still stand, fortifications that once guarded important positions, necropolises where generations laid their dead to rest. These archaeological landscapes reveal long-standing human occupation, with medieval structures built atop Roman foundations, which themselves often rest on Illyrian sites. Each generation built upon what came before, creating a palimpsest of human endeavor, where the stones themselves hold memories of countless lives lived across the centuries. This is the story of early human presence in Albania, a story that begins in the mists of the Paleolithic and continues through the Iron Age, through encounters with Greeks and Romans, through the spread of Christianity and into the medieval world. It's a story of persistence, of adaptation, of people who looked at mountains and valleys and coastlines and decided to call them home. As you drift towards sleep, imagine those ancient footpaths through mountain passes, the voices in marketplaces where Illyrian and Greek and Latin mingled, the flickering oil lamps in early Christian churches, the patient hands that shaped stone tools millennia ago. All of it happened there, in that small corner of the Balkans, where history lies deep beneath the earth, waiting to tell its stories to those who listen. Chapter 3: Early Societies and Daily Life. Imagine waking at dawn in a valley nestled between mountains, where the morning mist clings to the hillsides and the sound of a distant river whispers through the air. This was life for the ancient peoples who called this region home, long before the name Albania existed. From at least the 2nd millennium BCE, various Illyrian tribes made these lands their own. The Taulanti settled along the coast, their lives intertwined with the rhythms of the sea. The Dardanians occupied the northeastern highlands. Hardy people adapted to mountain living. The Ardi and Lebites claimed their own territories, each tribe with its own customs, its own leadership, its own story. These communities formed the cultural backbone of what would eventually become Albanian identity, though that transformation would take many centuries and countless generations. They were not a unified nation in any modern sense, but rather a constellation of related peoples bound by language, custom, and the land they shared. The landscape itself shaped everything about daily life. The Balkans' rugged terrain didn't allow for large, sprawling cities or vast agricultural estates. Instead, small settlements dotted the valleys and clustered along rivers where the land was gentler and water more accessible. These communities were dispersed, each one relatively isolated by the mountains that surrounded them, yet connected by narrow paths and age-old knowledge of the terrain. Life was built on subsistence, farming what the valleys would yield, raising livestock that could navigate steep slopes, and foraging in the forests and alpine pastures where wild foods grew in abundance. Nothing was wasted. Everything had its purpose and its season. These early Albanian societies practiced what we might call an agro-pastoral economy, a beautiful balance between cultivation and herding. In the valley floors and gentler slopes, they cultivated grains, wheat and barley that would be ground into flour for bread, the staff of life. They grew legumes that enriched the soil and provided protein. In certain favored regions where the climate was right, grapevines climbed along supports, their fruit destined for wine that would grace feasts and rituals. But farming alone couldn't sustain them in this mountainous land. So they also kept flocks and herds, sheep whose wool could be spun and woven, goats that could climb where other animals couldn't, and cattle that provided milk, meat, and labor. In summer, shepherds would drive their animals to high alpine pastures where the grass grew sweet and abundant, a practice called transhumance that continued for thousands of years. The social fabric of these communities was woven from kinship and tribal bonds. Your identity came first from your family, then from your clan, and finally from your tribe. Leadership wasn't imposed from distant capitals. It emerged from within the community itself. Elders who had proven their wisdom over decades, chieftains who commanded respect through their judgment and courage, These were the people who guided their communities. They enforced customary laws, traditions passed down orally from generation to generation, ancestral wisdom about right and wrong, about property and honor, about justice and recompense. Later, some of these customs would be formalized in what became known as the Kanun during the medieval period, but their roots reached back to these ancient times. When disputes arose, as they inevitably did, these leaders would gather the parties, hear the grievances, and render decisions based on precedent and custom, maintaining order without written codes or formal courts. Walk through one of these ancient settlements, and you would find houses built from what the land provided, stone quarried from nearby outcrops, timber cut from mountain forests. The layouts were simple and practical, designed for shelter rather than display. Though surely some houses were larger or better positioned than others, reflecting the status of their inhabitants. Inside these homes, you might find pottery vessels for storing grain and water, some decorated with patterns that identified the maker or the tribe. Weapons hung on walls or rested in corners, bronze and later iron spears, swords and daggers that served both for defense and as symbols of status. And there would be jewelry too, crafted by skilled metal workers who understood how to heat and shape bronze and iron into rings, bracelets and fibulae, those elegant pins used to fasten clothing. These weren't just ornaments. They were displays of craftsmanship, wealth, and cultural identity. Death, as in all human societies, held profound significance. When someone died, the community gathered to honor them according to practices that varied by tribe and region. Some of the deceased were cremated, their bodies transformed by fire into ash and bone, which would be gathered and placed in urns. Others were buried whole, laid to rest in the earth with grave goods to accompany them on their journey to whatever lay beyond. These goods tell us stories. A warrior might be buried with his weapons, a woman with her jewelry and pottery, a child with toys or special objects. The presence and richness of these grave goods often signaled social status, showing us that even in ancient times, not all lives were valued equally by their communities, but each burial, elaborate or simple, represented a moment when the living paused to remember and honor one of their own. These tribes didn't live in isolation from the wider world. They participated in trade networks that stretched across the Adriatic and into the Aegean. Merchants and traders moved along mountain paths and sailed coastal waters, carrying metals extracted from local mines, copper, iron, and perhaps silver. They transported salt, that precious preservative and flavor enhancer. Their pottery, distinctive in style, found its way to distant markets. Agricultural products, wine, olive oil, grains, traveled in amphorae to feed and delight people in faraway cities. In return, they received goods they couldn't produce themselves, along with ideas, technologies, and cultural influences that slowly transformed their own societies. Trade wasn't just economic, it was a form of cultural exchange, a way that isolated mountain communities connected with the broader world. Religion permeated every aspect of life. These early communities practiced polytheistic beliefs, worshipping multiple deities associated with natural forces, gods of the sky and thunder, goddesses of fertility and harvest, protective spirits of the home and hearth. Sacred sites dotted the landscape. Certain springs where the water was believed to have healing properties, groves of ancient trees where no axe was permitted to fall, high places where offerings could be made closer to the heavens. Religious practices weren't separate from daily life but woven into it. A farmer might make an offering before planting, a shepherd before driving the flock to summer pasture, a community before battle or during drought. These rituals provided comfort, structure, and a sense of connection to forces greater than themselves. The ancient inhabitants spoke languages we classify as Illyrian-related, though much about these tongues remains mysterious to us. But here's something fascinating to consider. The ethnogenesis of Albanians as a distinct people wasn't a simple straight line from these ancient Illyrians to today. It was a complex process of continuity and transformation, of assimilation and resistance. Over centuries, Slavic peoples moved into the Balkans, bringing their languages and customs. Latin, through Roman administration and settlement, left deep imprints. Yet somehow, through all these influences and pressures, something distinctly Albanian emerged during the medieval period. A people, a language, an identity that claimed these lands as their ancestral home. As classical antiquity dawned, these Illyrian groups found themselves increasingly in contact with the Greek and Roman worlds. Greek colonies along the coast exposed them to Hellenic culture and philosophy, and then came Rome with its legions and laws, its roads and aqueducts. Roman expansion didn't merely conquer, it transformed. Roman administration brought new forms of governance. Urbanization concentrated populations in cities with forums, baths, and temples. Infrastructure, those magnificent Roman roads, connected previously isolated regions. Daily life changed as local economies integrated into the vast Roman system. Yet beneath these changes, older patterns persisted, customs endured, and the land itself remained, shaped by the same mountains and rivers that had always defined it. This transition set the stage for medieval Albanian culture and the eventual emergence of Albanian kingdoms and principalities, each one building upon the foundations laid by countless generations who had lived, worked, loved, and died in these valleys and mountains. So as you drift toward sleep, picture that dawn in an ancient valley. Smell the wood smoke rising from stone houses. Hear the bleating of sheep and goats being led to pasture. See the potter's wheel turning, the blacksmith's hammer falling, the shepherd climbing toward summer meadows. Feel the weight of custom and kinship, the comfort of ritual and belief. These people are long gone, their languages barely remembered, their individual stories lost to time. But their legacy remains woven into the land itself, into the patterns of life that continued for millennia, into the very identity of a people who would someday call themselves Albanian. Chapter 4: First Organized States. From scattered tribes and small settlements, something larger began to emerge. Organized states with capitals, kings, and the power to shape the destiny of entire regions. Let us journey through the evolution of governance in Albanian lands, from ancient kingdoms to medieval principalities. In the 3rd century BCE, the first major organized state rose along the Adriatic coast. This was the Illyrian kingdom, most famously ruled by the Ardean dynasty, whose power extended across a significant portion of the coastline. The kingdom reached its zenith under King Agron, a formidable ruler who built a naval power capable of challenging the greatest forces of the Mediterranean. When Agron died, power passed to his widow, Queen Tuta, a remarkable woman who would become legendary in her own right. Tuta continued her husband's policies, commanding fleets that controlled the Adriatic trade routes and even daring to challenge the might of the Roman Republic. Imagine the audacity. A kingdom in the Balkans standing against Rome itself, its ships sailing forth with confidence born of naval supremacy. The heart of this Illyrian kingdom beat in a fortified city called Skodra, which we know today as Škoda. Perched strategically where it could command the surrounding territory, Skodra served as the royal capital, a place where the Ardean rulers held court and made decisions that rippled across their realm. It was both a political center and a military stronghold, its walls and position designed to withstand siege and assault. From Skodra, the kingdom's power radiated outward, and to Skodra, tribute and loyalty flowed inward. The city embodied the transformation from tribal leadership to royal authority, from dispersed settlements to centralized state power. But even the mightiest kingdoms can fall. Rome, challenged by Tuta's fleets and ambitions, responded with characteristic determination. The Illyrian Wars began in 229 BCE and continued intermittently until 168 BCE, a long struggle that ended, as Rome's wars usually did, with Roman victory. The territory wasn't immediately transformed into a single province. Rome's approach was more gradual, more patient. Piece by piece, the land was incorporated into the Roman administrative system. Eventually, it became the province of Illyricum, a vast territory under Roman governance. Later still, when the Emperor Diocletian reorganized the empire at the end of the 3rd century CE, Illyricum was split. The northern Albanian regions fell into a province called Praevalitana, while southern Albania became part of Epirus Nova. These divisions were administrative conveniences for Rome, but they carved lines through the landscape that would influence the region for centuries. When the Western Roman Empire crumbled, the eastern half, what we call the Byzantine Empire, continued. And for Byzantium, the Albanian coast remained vitally important. The region was organized into the theme of Dyrrachium, named for the city of Durrës, which the Byzantines called Dyrrachium. A theme was both an administrative district and a military command, and the theme of Dyrrachium held particular strategic significance. It guarded the Byzantine Empire's western approaches, the vulnerable frontier where threats could emerge from Italy or the Adriatic. More importantly, it protected the Via Egnatia, that ancient road built by the Romans, which connected Constantinople to the Adriatic Sea, a vital artery for trade, communication, and military movement. The theme's commanders held significant power and responsibility, maintaining Byzantine authority in a region always subject to external pressures and internal challenges. In the late 12th century, something new emerged from the mountainous interior, the first recorded medieval Albanian statelet. This was the Principality of Arbanon, known in Albanian as Arba, centered around the fortress town of Kruja. Initially, Arbanon existed as a vassal, first of the Byzantine Empire and later of the Despotate of Epirus, acknowledging the sovereignty of more powerful neighbors while maintaining internal autonomy. But gradually, the principality began asserting its independence, its rulers making decisions without seeking approval from distant capitals. Arbanon represents something crucial in Albanian history. It was a direct precursor to the Albanian nation, a polity where Albanian identity, language, and governance came together in organized form for the first time. The 13th century brought foreign intervention from an unexpected direction. In 1272, Charles I of Anjou, who ruled as King of Naples from his base in southern Italy, turned his ambitious gaze eastward across the Adriatic. His forces conquered the coastal regions of Albania, and he proclaimed himself the ruler of a new entity, the Kingdom of Albania, or Regnum Albaniae in Latin. This was a feudal state in the Western European model, with Charles granting lands to loyal nobles and establishing a hierarchical system of vassalage. The Angevin Kingdom of Albania was short-lived, its existence more a testament to Charles's ambitions than to any deep roots in the region. But it represented another layer in the complex political history of these lands. During this same medieval period, the Despotate of Epirus, a Greek-speaking realm that emerged from the fragmentation of the Byzantine Empire after the Fourth Crusade, controlled parts of southern Albania. Though primarily Greek in language and culture, the despotate was heavily influenced by Albanian noble families who held significant power and extensive lands within its borders. At times, these Albanian nobles effectively ruled portions of the despotate, wielding authority that transcended ethnic and linguistic boundaries. The despotate lasted from 1205 until 1479, its long existence weaving Albanian aristocrats deeply into the governance of the region. But the most important political structures of late medieval Albania were the principalities themselves, independent, feudal domains ruled by powerful Albanian noble families. The most notable was the Principality of Kastrioti, the domain of the Kastrioti family, from which would emerge Skanderbeg, Albania's greatest national hero. There was also the Principality of Dukagjini, ruled by the powerful Dukagjini clan, and the Principality of Arianiti, among others. These were true organized states, each with its own military forces, its own administration, its own court and customs. The princes who ruled them were powerful lords who commanded castles, collected taxes, dispensed justice, and made war or peace according to their own interests and the ever-shifting alliances of the Balkans. In 1444, facing an existential threat from the expanding Ottoman Empire, these principalities did something remarkable. They set aside their rivalries and united. At the city of Lazia, Albanian nobles gathered and formed the League of Lazia, a military and diplomatic alliance under the leadership of Skanderbeg. While not a unified kingdom with a single monarch wearing a crown, the League functioned as a de facto confederate state for over 2 decades. It coordinated defense, shared intelligence, pooled military resources, and presented a united front against the Ottomans. The League of Lazia represented the high point of medieval Albanian political unity, a moment when fractious principalities recognized that survival required cooperation. Yet even in their unity, these principalities maintained their traditional ways of governance. They were not ruled by a single centralized law code imposed from a capital city. Instead, they operated according to collections of traditional customs that had been passed down through generations and gradually codified. The most famous of these is the Kanun of Leke Dukagjini, named after the prince who is credited with formalizing these ancient customs into a comprehensive legal framework. The Kanun governed every aspect of life: social behavior, property rights, marriage customs, the resolution of disputes, and perhaps most famously, concepts of honor and blood feuds. It served as a form of common law across Albanian inhabited regions. Its authority derived not from royal decree, but from tradition and communal acceptance. For centuries, long after the principalities themselves had fallen to Ottoman conquest, the Kanun continued to govern daily life in Albanian communities, particularly in the northern highlands, where central authority rarely reached. These medieval states, from the Byzantine theme to the League of Legge, represented the political coming of age of Albanian society. They were the structures through which Albanians governed themselves, defended their lands, and expressed their identity. Some lasted centuries, others mere decades, but each left its mark on the landscape and the collective memory of the people. As you drift toward sleep, imagine the fortified walls of Skodra, the courts of Albanian princes in mountain strongholds, the gathering of nobles at Legge swearing oaths of alliance, the elders settling disputes according to the ancient Kanun. These were the first organized Albanian states, the foundations upon which everything that followed would build. Chapter 5: Gradual changes over time. History doesn't always move in dramatic leaps. Sometimes the most profound transformations happen slowly, almost imperceptibly, like water wearing away stone or seasons changing the landscape. In Albania, as everywhere, some of the deepest changes unfolded gradually, over generations, reshaping the very fabric of society. Consider the transformation from a land of independent Illyrian tribes to a consolidated province of Rome. This wasn't accomplished in a single conquest or a single year. By the 1st century CE, after generations of Roman presence and influence, the region had fundamentally changed. Roman law replaced tribal customs in many contexts, bringing standardized legal procedures and the concept of citizenship. Infrastructure projects like the Via Egnatia, that great road connecting the Adriatic to the Aegean, carved permanent pathways through the landscape, facilitating trade, military movement, and cultural exchange. Latin began to influence local languages, planting seeds that would grow into the Romance vocabulary still found in Albanian today. The economy integrated into the vast Mediterranean network, where olive oil from Spain, grain from Egypt, and pottery from Gaul might all meet in a market in Illyria. These changes didn't happen overnight. They accumulated layer upon layer, year after year, until the world of the Illyrian tribes belonged to memory and the Roman province was simply reality. Centuries later, another gradual transformation began when the Ottoman Empire expanded into the Balkans. Starting in 1385, Albania came under Ottoman rule, and over the following centuries, the religious landscape of the country slowly shifted. While there were instances of forced conversion, the broader transformation was more subtle and complex. Many Albanians gradually converted to Islam, drawn by practical considerations: lower taxes for Muslims, greater opportunities for advancement within the imperial system, access to positions of power and prestige. Generation by generation, family by family, the religious composition of Albania changed. Some communities remained Christian, preserving their faith through centuries of Ottoman rule. Others embraced Islam, and their descendants would carry that faith forward. This slow religious transformation would profoundly shape Albanian identity, creating a society where Muslims and Christians lived side by side, where religious identity was important, but not always the primary marker of who belonged and who didn't. In the 19th century, as the Ottoman Empire weakened and nationalist movements swept across Europe, Albanians began their own slow awakening. This was the Rilinja Kombëtare, the national awakening, a gradual process of cultural and political consciousness building. It started with individuals, writers, educators, intellectuals, who began publishing in the Albanian language, which had been primarily oral for centuries. They established schools where Albanian children could learn in their mother tongue rather than Turkish or Greek. Cultural societies formed, gathering places where Albanians could discuss their history, their language, their shared identity. These might seem like small steps, but they were revolutionary. Over decades, these efforts forged a modern national consciousness, an awareness of being Albanian that transcended religious differences and regional loyalties. By the time independence came in 1912, this gradual awakening had created a people ready to claim their place among the nations of Europe. But declaring independence and actually building a functioning state are two different challenges. After 1912, Albania spent decades in the slow, difficult work of state building. The country had to establish fixed borders, which meant negotiations, conflicts, and compromises with neighbors. It needed to create a national government with legitimacy and authority throughout the territory. No easy task in a land of mountain valleys where local leaders had long held power. A unified administrative system had to be developed, connecting remote highlands to coastal cities, standardizing laws and procedures, creating the institutions that modern states require. This process was repeatedly interrupted by feudal resistance, by foreign occupation during World War I and World War II, by internal strife and coups. Each interruption meant starting over, rebuilding, trying again. State building in Albania was not a triumphant march, but a halting, painful process that took generations. After World War II, Albania entered perhaps its most radical period of transformation under Enver Hoxha's communist regime, which lasted from 1944 to 1991. The changes were sweeping but implemented gradually. Agriculture was collectivized, with private farms slowly absorbed into state-run collectives. Industry was nationalized, one enterprise at a time, until the state controlled all means of production. Religious institutions were gradually suppressed, then banned entirely, as Albania became the world's only officially atheist state. Churches and mosques closed, religious practice driven underground or abandoned. The country isolated itself first from the West, then from the Soviet Union after breaking with Moscow, and finally even from China, its last major ally. By the 1980s, Albania stood alone, a hermit kingdom in Europe, sealed off from both capitalist West and the communist East. The isolation wasn't absolute or immediate. It deepened year by year until Albania became perhaps the most closed society on earth. When communism fell in 1991, Albania faced yet another transformation, this time from a centralized, state-run economy to something resembling a market democracy. This transition was slow, often turbulent, sometimes descending into chaos. State assets were gradually privatized, though the process was plagued by corruption and mismanagement. Democratic norms had to be established in a society with no living memory of democracy. Political parties formed, elections were held, but the habits of authoritarianism died hard. In 1997, the country suffered a catastrophic blow when pyramid investment schemes, which had ensnared much of the population's savings, collapsed, triggering a brief civil conflict and economic devastation. Recovery from that disaster took years. The transition from communism wasn't a clean break, but a messy, painful process of trial and error, of learning by failure, of slowly building institutions and trust. Alongside this internal transformation, Albania made a strategic choice that would define its recent history, a gradual pivot toward Euro-Atlantic structures and Western integration. This was a long process requiring extensive reforms. Laws had to be rewritten to align with European Union standards. Institutions had to be reformed, corruption fought, democratic practices strengthened. The military had to be modernized and made compatible with NATO standards. These efforts bore fruit in 2009 when Albania joined NATO, a milestone that represented both security and a clear geopolitical orientation toward the West. Later, Albania became an official candidate for European Union membership, though full membership remains a goal requiring continued reform and patience. This integration process has been gradual, demanding, and ongoing, but it represents a fundamental reorientation of Albania's place in the world. The fall of communism triggered another profound change: mass migration. After decades of enforced isolation, Albanians could finally leave, and hundreds of thousands did. They crossed borders primarily to Greece and Italy, seeking economic opportunities that didn't exist at home. This exodus continued for years, a slow but persistent demographic shift. Albania's population began declining and aging as young people left for better lives abroad. But this migration also created something new: a large, influential diaspora that maintained connections to their homeland. These immigrants sent remittances that supported families and fueled the economy. They brought back ideas, experiences, and capital. The diaspora became a bridge between Albania and the wider world, a consequence of migration that transformed both those who left and those who stayed. For centuries, Albanian society was predominantly rural, with most people living in villages, farming the land their ancestors had farmed. But the 20th and 21st centuries have witnessed a gradual but accelerating shift toward urbanization. The capital, Tirana, has transformed dramatically. Once a small town, it has grown into a sprawling metropolitan center with apartment blocks, shopping districts, cafes, and traffic jams. Villages have emptied as young people moved to cities seeking education, employment, and opportunity. Infrastructure developed, roads improved, electricity became reliable, water systems expanded. These changes in where and how people live have fundamentally altered Albanian society, shifting it from an agrarian to an increasingly urban culture, changing family structures, work patterns, and daily rhythms of life. Perhaps one of the most recent and remarkable gradual changes has been Albania's digital and technological modernization. Under communism, Albania had almost no international communication. Phones were scarce, controlled, monitored. The internet didn't exist, and information from outside was heavily restricted. But in the space of just a few decades, Albania has gradually integrated into the global digital world. Internet access has spread from cities to rural areas. Smartphones have become ubiquitous. Government services have moved online. Businesses operate websites. Young people scroll through social media. And Albanians are as connected to global information flows as citizens of wealthier European nations. This digital transformation has affected everything: how people work, how they access services, how they maintain relationships, how they understand the world. It represents a quiet revolution, a technological leap that connects contemporary Albania to global networks of information, commerce, and culture. These gradual changes, from Roman province to modern nation, from tribal religions to religious plurality, from isolation to integration, from rural to urban, from analog to digital, tell the story of transformation. None happened instantly. Each unfolded over years, decades, sometimes centuries. Together, they show how societies change not just through dramatic revolutions, but through the accumulation of countless small shifts that eventually create a world unrecognizable to earlier generations. As you drift towards sleep, imagine time flowing like a river, carrying Albania from ancient tribes to modern nation, each change building on what came before, each generation adding its layer to the story until the present moment arrived, full of all that history, all those gradual transformations that made Albania what it is today. Chapter 6: Outside Influence and Foreign Rule. Throughout its long history, the land we call Albania has rarely existed in isolation. Powers from beyond its borders have shaped its destiny, sometimes through conquest, sometimes through alliance, and sometimes through forces beyond its control. This is the story of outside influence and foreign rule, a tale that spans more than 2 millennia. The first great empire to claim these lands was Rome. Through a series of conflicts known as the Illyrian Wars, fought between 229 and 168 BCE, Roman legions gradually conquered the Illyrian territories. This wasn't a single decisive battle, but a slow, methodical campaign that ended with the proud Illyrian kingdoms brought to heel. The region was fully incorporated as the province of Illyricum, and with Roman rule came profound transformation. Latin spread as the language of administration, commerce, and culture. Roman customs, Roman law, Roman architecture, all took root in Albanian soil. This Romanization was so complete that Latin became the foundation for what would eventually emerge as the Albanian language, making modern Albanian one of the few surviving descendants of the ancient languages spoken in the Roman Balkans. Rome's influence wasn't temporary, it was foundational, shaping the very linguistic and cultural DNA of the region. When the Roman Empire split in 395 CE, Albania found itself part of the Eastern Roman Empire, which history would come to call the Byzantine Empire. For nearly a millennium, Albania remained a core Byzantine province, integrated into a civilization that spoke Greek, worshipped according to Orthodox Christian rites, and saw itself as the continuation of Rome itself. Byzantine rule cemented Orthodox Christianity in much of Albania, building churches whose ruins still stand today. The region became woven into the Greco-Byzantine cultural and economic sphere. connected to Constantinople and the great trading networks of the Mediterranean and Black Sea. Byzantine emperors sent governors, soldiers and priests. Byzantine artists created mosaics and icons. Byzantine merchants traded in Albanian ports. This wasn't mere occupation. It was integration into a civilization that would profoundly influence Albanian culture and identity. In the mid-14th century, a new power briefly cast its shadow over Albania. The Serbian Empire, under the ambitious ruler Stefan Dušan, expanded southward and conquered much of Albanian territory, incorporating it into his realm. Stefan Dušan styled himself Emperor of Serbs and Greeks, ruling from his capital with visions of creating a new Byzantine empire under Serbian leadership. His reign introduced Slavic cultural and administrative elements to Albania. Orthodox monasteries founded by Serbian nobles, Slavic administrative terminology, new trading connections northward. But Stefan Dušan's empire was fragile, built on his personal authority. When he died in 1355, his empire quickly fragmented, and Serbian control over Albania proved short-lived. Yet even this brief period left traces, another layer in the complex cultural palimpsest of the region. Then came the Ottomans, and with them, the most defining period of foreign rule in Albanian history. The Ottoman invasion began in 1385, and Ottoman sovereignty would last for over 500 years until 1912. This was not a brief occupation, but an epoch spanning more than half a millennium during which Albanian society was drastically altered. Many Albanians converted to Islam over the centuries, some through coercion, others through the practical benefits conversion offered: lower taxes, access to positions in government and military, protection from various legal disabilities. Ottoman architecture rose in Albanian cities: mosques with their distinctive minarets, covered markets, public baths, bridges built in the Ottoman style. Ottoman customs influenced daily life, from cuisine to clothing to social organization. Albanians were integrated into the imperial administration and military, rising to positions of considerable power. Albanian pashas governed provinces. Albanian soldiers fought in Ottoman armies from Vienna to Yemen. The Ottoman period transformed Albania so thoroughly that its effects are still visible and felt today. Yet within this story of Ottoman rule exists a fascinating paradox, embodied in one of Albania's greatest heroes. Gjë Kastrioti, known to history as Skanderbeg, was born into an Albanian noble family, but taken as a child hostage to the Ottoman court, a common practice to ensure loyalty of conquered territories. Raised as a Muslim and educated in Ottoman military arts, he became a brilliant commander in the Ottoman army, trusted and honored. But in 1443, Skanderbeg defected. He returned to Albania, reconverted to Christianity, and spent the next 25 years leading a rebellion against the very empire that had raised and trained him. The irony is profound. Albania's greatest symbol of resistance was forged in the crucible of Ottoman service. His military genius a gift from the enemy he would fight so effectively. Skanderbeg's story illustrates the complex relationship between Albanians and the Ottoman Empire, a relationship that was never simply one of oppressor and oppressed. When Albania finally declared independence in 1912, after over 5 centuries of Ottoman rule, its sovereignty was immediately compromised by new forms of foreign influence. The great powers of Europe, Austria-Hungary, Italy, Russia, Britain, France, Germany, gathered at the London Conference of 1913 to decide Albania's fate. These powers drew Albania's borders, often ignoring ethnic demographics and local wishes, instead pursuing their own strategic interests. Large Albanian populations were left outside the new state's boundaries, in Kosovo, in parts of Greece and Montenegro, divided from their kin by lines drawn in European capitals. Albania had won independence from the Ottomans, only to find its destiny still controlled by foreign powers who viewed the Balkans as a chessboard for their geopolitical games. Italy, in particular, considered Albania within its sphere of influence, viewing it as natural territory for Italian expansion across the Adriatic. During World War I, Italy established a protectorate over parts of Albania. Then, in 1939, Mussolini's forces invaded and annexed the country entirely, making it part of the Italian Empire. King Zog I, who had ruled Albania since 1928, was forced into exile, fleeing with his family and whatever treasures could be carried. Victor Emmanuel III of Italy was declared King of Albania, and Italian officials administered the country. Albanian resources were exploited for Italy's war effort. Albanian men were conscripted, and the country became a staging ground for Mussolini's ill-fated invasion of Greece. Italian occupation brought a new flavor of foreign control, this time from a European power seeking to recreate the glory of Rome. But Italy's control didn't last. In 1943, Italy surrendered to the Allies, and immediately Nazi Germany moved to fill the vacuum. German forces occupied Albania to prevent it from falling into Allied hands and to secure the Balkan flank. The Nazi occupation was brutal, marked by reprisals against partisan activity and the deportation of Albania's small Jewish population. However, the occupation also triggered fierce resistance. Both communist partisans led by Enver Hoxha and nationalist groups took up arms. The mountains of Albania became battlegrounds where local fighters, using their knowledge of the terrain, harassed German forces and sabotaged their operations. By the time the war ended, Albania's resistance movements had liberated much of the country themselves, a fact that would shape the nation's post-war trajectory. After World War II, Albania found itself under yet another form of foreign influence. Enver Hoxha's communist regime initially aligned closely with the Soviet Union under Stalin, becoming a satellite state within the Soviet orbit. Soviet advisors arrived, Soviet economic models were adopted, and Albania joined the Warsaw Pact, but the relationship soured after Stalin's death. Following the Soviet-Albanian split in 1961, Albania broke with Moscow and instead became a close ally of the People's Republic of China. Maoist policies were adopted, Chinese aid flowed in, and Albania styled itself as Europe's only truly Marxist-Leninist state. But even this relationship eventually deteriorated. In 1978, after China began normalizing relations with the United States, Albania broke with Beijing as well. What followed was total self-imposed isolation, with Albania standing alone, accepting neither Soviet nor Chinese nor Western influence, a hermit kingdom sealed against the world. When communism finally fell in 1991, Albania once again opened itself to foreign influence, but this time through choice rather than conquest. The primary influence in the post-communist era has come through peaceful integration with Western institutions. In 2009, Albania joined NATO, placing itself under the collective security umbrella of the Atlantic Alliance, aligning its military and security policies with those of the United States and Western Europe. Albania is currently a candidate for membership in the European Union, a process that requires the gradual adoption of vast bodies of EU laws and standards, everything from food safety regulations to judicial reforms to environmental protections. This modern integration represents a fundamental reorientation, a deliberate choice to bind Albania's future to Euro-Atlantic structures, to embrace foreign influence not as imposed domination, but as voluntary partnership. So ends this long history of outside influence, from Roman legions to Byzantine emperors, from Serbian kings to Ottoman sultans, from great power conferences to Italian kings, to Nazi occupation, to Soviet and Chinese communist influence, and finally to voluntary integration with Western democratic institutions. Through all of this, Albania endured, adapted, resisted when possible, accommodated when necessary, and somehow maintained a distinct identity even as foreign powers shaped its language, religion, culture, and politics. As you drift toward sleep, imagine the countless generations who lived under these various rulers, who navigated between resistance and survival, who preserved what they could of their own traditions while absorbing influences from beyond their borders, until finally, in our own time, Albania stands as an independent nation, choosing its own path, master of its own destiny at last. Chapter 7: Ordinary Life Under These Changes. History is often told through the deeds of kings and conquerors, through treaties and battles, and the rise and fall of empires. But beneath these grand narratives, ordinary people live their daily lives, waking each morning to face the particular challenges and opportunities of their time. Let us walk through centuries of Albanian history, not from the palace or battlefield, but from the perspective of everyday existence. Under Ottoman rule, which lasted for over 5 centuries, daily life was organized around the millet system, a framework that divided the population not by ethnicity, but by religious community. Whether you were Muslim, Orthodox Christian, or Catholic determined much about your daily existence. Your religious community governed matters of personal law, marriage ceremonies, divorce proceedings, inheritance rights, the education of your children. An Albanian Muslim might live next door to an Albanian Orthodox Christian, speaking the same language, sharing similar customs, but when it came to marriage or settling an estate, they answered to different authorities, followed different rules, attended different institutions. This created a society where religious identity could matter more than ethnic identity, where community boundaries were drawn along lines of faith rather than language or ancestry. For the vast majority of Albanians during the Ottoman period, life meant working the land. The çiftlik system came to dominate the countryside. Large private estates owned by landlords who often lived far away in cities, never setting foot on the land that enriched them. Imagine waking before dawn, walking out to fields that your family had worked for generations but did not own. The rhythm of life followed the seasons, ploughing, planting, tending, harvesting. And when harvest came, a portion, sometimes a large portion, went to the landlord as tax or rent. What remained had to sustain your family through the year. There was little social mobility, little hope of changing your station. If your father was a peasant farmer on a çiftlik, you would almost certainly be one too, and so would your children. Life was hard agricultural labor, subsistence living, and the weight of obligations to distant landlords. But even under occupation, resistance took quiet forms. During periods when Ottoman authorities suppressed the teaching of Albanian language, families engaged in a practice that became legendary: the secret school, or Shkolla e Fshehtë. Picture it: a basement room, shutters drawn, children gathered in dim candlelight. A teacher, perhaps a priest or simply a literate villager, opening banned books and teaching the Albanian alphabet, Albanian grammar, Albanian literature and history. These clandestine classes were dangerous. Discovery could mean punishment for everyone involved. Yet families risked it because they understood that language is a vessel of identity, that without their language, their children would lose something essential. The secret school became a shared underground cultural experience, an act of collective defiance that preserved Albanian identity through the darkest periods of suppression. When independence finally came in 1912, ordinary people hoped their lives would improve. But for most, little changed. Despite independence, Albania remained largely feudal. Powerful local beys, landlords who had thrived under Ottoman rule, continued to dominate the countryside. The central government in the capital was weak, its authority barely extending beyond the largest cities. For the average person, security depended on local strongmen. Justice was dispensed by whoever held power in your region, and economic opportunity remained intensely local and unpredictable. The flag had changed. The nominal ruler was Albanian rather than Ottoman. But the daily struggles of most people continued much as before. During King Zog's reign from 1928 to 1939, the first real attempts at modernization began to touch ordinary lives, at least in the cities. Zog sought to break the power of the feudal beys, though with limited success. He introduced Western-style secular education, building schools where children could learn mathematics, science and literature, alongside religious instruction. He banned the wearing of veils for women, a controversial move that was meant to signal Albania's modernization and Europeanization. These changes came slowly and unevenly. In Tirana and other cities, you might see women's faces uncovered, children walking to new schools, the beginnings of a different kind of society. But in the remote mountain villages, life continued largely as it had for centuries. The king's decrees, distant pronouncements that barely touched the rhythms of pastoral existence. Then came the Italian occupation in 1939, and suddenly, ordinary life was subjected to forced cultural transformation. Italian became the mandatory language in schools. Albanian children sat at desks learning grammar and history in a foreign tongue, their own language relegated to home and whispers. The Albanian Fascist Party became the only permitted political organization. All public life had a flow through its structures. Italian colonists arrived, settlers given land and favorable treatment, competing directly with Albanian farmers for resources and opportunity. Daily life became a performance of compliance, learning to navigate a system designed to erase Albanian identity and replace it with Italian colonial culture. After World War II, when Enver Hoxha's communists took power, ordinary life transformed yet again, this time into something resembling a vast prison. the regime imposed total state control over every aspect of existence. The secret police, known as the Sigurimi, permeated society like a poison. Neighbors spied on neighbors. Children were encouraged to report their parents if they heard criticism of the party. Teachers monitored students. Workers monitored colleagues. Everyone watched everyone else. Travel abroad was forbidden. Albania's borders were sealed. Contact with the outside world became a serious crime. Receiving a letter from a relative who had escaped abroad could bring interrogation or worse. Daily life became a careful performance of loyalty to the party, a constant vigilance over your own words and actions, a smothering paranoia that trusted no one. The bunker mentality wasn't just a metaphor. Hoxha had hundreds of thousands of concrete bunkers built across the country, physical manifestations of the isolation and fear that defined the era. The communist regime also brought economic realities that shaped every single day. Albania operated under a command economy, where the state controlled all production and distribution. For the average citizen, this meant spending hours in long queues for basic goods. Bread, meat, fuel, all were rationed and often in short supply. You would wake early to stand in line, hoping the store wouldn't run out before your turn came. The state provided guaranteed employment, which meant everyone had a job, and education was free and universal. But these guarantees came with Spartan austerity and constant scarcity. Life was simple in the most fundamental sense. Simple in what you owned, in what you could buy, in what you could aspire to. Ambition beyond serving the state was suspect. Dreams of travel or wealth were dangerous. Existence was grey, regimented, and endlessly constrained. When communism fell in 1991, the sudden shift to capitalism created chaos. Ordinary Albanians, who had lived under total state control, were suddenly thrown into a market economy they didn't understand. And in this confusion, something remarkable and terrible happened. The pyramid scheme craze of 1996 to 1997. These were fraudulent investment schemes that promised impossibly high returns. In a population with no experience of market economics, no understanding of how investment actually works, these schemes spread like wildfire. People sold their homes, their livestock, everything they owned to invest. For a brief, intoxicating period, many Albanians felt suddenly wealthy. The schemes paid early investors with money from new investors, creating the illusion of legitimate profit. Ordinary people imagined their fortunes made, their futures secured. Then the inevitable happened. The schemes collapsed. Life savings vanished overnight. The rage and despair triggered a nationwide anarchic rebellion. Armories were looted, the government nearly collapsed, and order disintegrated. For many Albanians, this catastrophe defined the transition from communism, not gradual improvement, but a devastating lesson in the cruelties of unregulated capitalism. Today, ordinary life in Albania is characterized by forces unimaginable to earlier generations. Digital connectivity has transformed daily existence. The internet, smartphones, social media. These have rapidly modernized perspectives and lifestyles. Young people in Albanian cities are as connected to global trends and information as their counterparts in Paris or New York. They stream movies, follow international news, participate in global conversations. The isolation of the communist era has been replaced by radical openness to the world's ideas and cultures. Simultaneously, migration has become a defining feature of modern Albanian life. Nearly every family has been touched by emigration. Perhaps a son works in construction in Germany. A daughter cleans houses in Greece. Cousins run a restaurant in Italy. An uncle drives a taxi in New York. These emigrants send remittances, money that supports families back home, that builds houses and funds education, that keeps the economy functioning. Modern Albania is deeply connected to its diaspora, creating a society that exists simultaneously in the homeland and across Europe and North America. Families celebrate holidays via video calls spanning continents. Children grow up with stories of places they've never seen, where their relatives have built new lives. This migration has brought both opportunity and loss, prosperity, but also the pain of separation, connection to the wider world, but also the hollowing out of communities as the young and ambitious leave. This is what ordinary life has looked like across the centuries in Albania, shaped by the millet system and secret schools, by feudal landlords and communist queues, by pyramid schemes and diaspora connections, by every regime and system and transformation that swept through. Through it all, people woke each morning and lived their lives as best they could, navigating the particular challenges of their time, finding moments of joy and connection, raising children and honoring traditions, enduring what had to be endured, and celebrating what could be celebrated. As you drift towards sleep, imagine those countless ordinary lives, each one precious, each one a story, all of them together forming the true history of Albania. Not the history of kings and battles, but the history of daily existence, of survival and adaptation, of humanity persisting through every change and challenge history could devise. Chapter 8: Transition to the Modern Era. There are moments in history when the old world ends and a new one begins, when the structures that seem permanent suddenly crumble, and everything that follows is different. For Albania, that moment came in 1991, and the journey from that point to the present day is a story of transformation, crisis, resilience, and rebirth. Picture February 1991 in Tirana's central square. For decades, a giant statue of Enver Hoxha had stood there, a monument to the dictator who had ruled Albania with an iron fist for 46 years, who had isolated the country from the world, who had turned Albania into Europe's most repressive state. The statue was massive, imposing, a constant physical reminder of his power and the regime's permanence. But on this February day, protesters gathered. The anger and frustration of decades found its outlet. They pulled ropes around the statue, they pushed, they chanted, and slowly the monument began to tilt. Then it fell, crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust and debris. The crowd erupted in celebration. It was a symbolic act, but symbols matter. The fall of Hoxha's statue marked the definitive end of communist rule, the moment when ordinary Albanians publicly declared that the old order was finished and something new, however uncertain, would take its place. The Albania that emerged from communism was shockingly isolated and underdeveloped. To understand just how cut off the country had been, consider this. In 1990, Albania had only 1.4 telephone lines per 100 people, one of the lowest rates anywhere in the world. Europe's neighbors had sophisticated telecommunications networks. Albania had what observers called a Stone Age system. Most people had never made a phone call. International communication was virtually impossible. The transition to the modern era required building a national telecommunications network almost from scratch, laying cables, installing exchanges, creating infrastructure that other countries had developed over decades. It was like leaping from the 19th century directly into the late 20th, skipping entire generations of technological evolution. Politically, the transition was tentative and fraught. The first multi-party elections were held in March 1991, just weeks after Hoxha's statue fell. For the first time in nearly half a century, Albanians could choose between parties, but democracy was unfamiliar, and the communists, now renamed the Socialist Party, still held tremendous advantages in organization and resources. They won those first elections, yet something fundamental had changed. An opposition party, the Democratic Party, had competed openly and won seats. The existence of political opposition signaled that one-party rule was irreversibly finished, even if full political transformation would take several more turbulent years. Democracy had been planted, even if it was still a fragile seedling. Then came 1997, and with it, one of the most surreal and devastating crises of the post-communist transition. The chaotic shift to a market economy had created conditions ripe for exploitation. Pyramid schemes, fraudulent investment programs promising impossibly high returns, spread across Albania like a fever. In a population with no experience of capitalism or financial markets, these schemes found millions of eager investors. People sold their homes, their land, their livestock. They emptied their savings. They believed they had found a path to prosperity after decades of deprivation. But pyramid schemes are unsustainable by design. They collapse when new investment stops flowing in. In 1997, they collapsed spectacularly. The life savings of a vast majority of the population simply vanished. The rage was immediate and overwhelming. Nationwide armed rebellion erupted. Government armories were looted. Armed gangs roamed the streets. The government fell, unable to maintain order. It required international military intervention to restore even basic stability. The pyramid scheme crisis was more than an economic disaster. It was a trauma that scarred an entire generation. A brutal lesson about the perils of transition and the vulnerability of people trying to navigate unfamiliar economic systems. Just 2 years later, in 1999, history tested Albania again. But this time, the country's response revealed something profound about its modern identity. The Kosovo War erupted, and ethnic Albanian refugees fled across the border seeking safety. Albania, still one of Europe's poorest countries, still recovering from the anarchy of 1997, opened its borders and took in over 450,000 refugees. That's an astonishing number for a small country. Families who had little shared what they had. Temporary camps were established. The state mobilized whatever resources it possessed. This moment of national solidarity, this willingness to help fellow Albanians despite Albania's own poverty and instability, strengthened the country's Western orientation and earned it goodwill from the international community. It showed that Albania, despite all its struggles, could act with generosity and principle. On April 1st, 2009, Albania achieved a milestone that would have seemed impossible during the communist era. It became a full member of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This was far more than a diplomatic achievement. NATO membership provided a crucial security guarantee, assuring Albania that it was protected under the collective defense umbrella of the world's most powerful military alliance. It formally anchored the country within Western political and military structures, ending any ambiguity about Albania's geopolitical orientation. For a country that had spent decades isolated from both East and West, joining NATO represented a definitive choice, a commitment to integration with Euro-Atlantic institutions. That same drive for Western integration continues through Albania's pursuit of European Union membership. The country was granted official candidate status in 2014, but candidacy is just the beginning of a long journey. The transition to EU membership requires aligning an entire country's systems, its judiciary, its economy, its political institutions, with EU standards. This means deep and often difficult structural reforms, fighting corruption that had become endemic, reforming a judiciary that many viewed as politicized and inefficient, strengthening democratic institutions, improving environmental regulations, upgrading infrastructure. The process is measured not in months, but in years, sometimes decades. It requires sustained political will and the patience to implement changes that may not show immediate benefits. This ongoing effort to meet EU standards defines much of Albania's modern political life. While these political transformations unfolded, a massive demographic shift was reshaping Albanian society. Since 1990, over a third of Albania's population has emigrated, seeking economic opportunities that didn't exist at home. They went to Greece, to Italy, to Germany, to the United Kingdom, to the United States and Canada. This mass emigration has led to a declining and aging population within Albania itself. Villages have emptied, with only the elderly remaining. Schools have closed for lack of children. But this emigration has also created something powerful, a large, influential diaspora that maintains deep connections to the homeland. These emigrants send remittances that are vital to Albania's economy, supporting families, funding construction, enabling education. The diaspora has become an integral part of modern Albanian identity, creating a nation that exists both within its borders and scattered across the globe. Internally, the country has undergone its own dramatic transformation, particularly visible in the capital. Tirana has metamorphosed from a sleepy, monochrome communist city, where buildings were uniform grey, where cars were rare, where life moved slowly under state control, into a vibrant, colourful and overcrowded metropolitan hub. Buildings have been painted in bright colours, reds, yellows, oranges, blues, in a deliberate effort to shake off the drabness of the communist era. Cafes and restaurants fill the streets. Traffic jams are constant. High-rise construction continues relentlessly. This rapid and largely unplanned urbanization reflects a mass internal migration as people abandon the countryside seeking new economic opportunities in the city. The social and physical landscape has been drastically altered, creating a dynamic but chaotic urban environment that embodies both the opportunities and challenges of Albania's transition. Perhaps the most dramatic change has been technological. Albania has made a phenomenal leap from a state with almost no international communication to one with widespread internet and mobile phone penetration. Under communism, there were virtually no phones, no computers, no connection to the outside world. Today, smartphones are ubiquitous. Internet cafes appeared in the 1990s, and then gave way to personal devices and home connections. Social media connects Albanians to each other and to the world. This digital revolution has fundamentally changed how Albanians access information, conduct business, and connect with family in the diaspora and with the broader global community. Young Albanians today live in a digital environment indistinguishable from their peers in Western Europe, a transformation accomplished in barely a generation. The transition to the modern era has not been smooth or easy. It has involved crisis and chaos, loss and hardship. The pyramid schemes destroyed lives. Emigration separated families. The reforms required for EU membership have been painful and slow. But through all of this, Albania has moved inexorably forward, leaving behind the isolation and repression of the communist past, building democratic institutions, integrating with the West, connecting to the global economy and the digital world. From the fall of Hoxha's statue to NATO membership, to the glow of smartphone screens in Tirana's cafes, Albania has transformed itself, becoming a modern nation navigating the complexities of the 21st century. As you drift towards sleep, imagine that journey, from isolation to openness, from repression to democracy, from poverty to possibility, and all the millions of individual lives that lived through these transformations, adapting to each new reality, building futures their parents could never have imagined. Chapter 9. Things Albania is known for today. After our journey through Albania's long history, let us arrive in the present moment and discover what this country is known for today, the things that capture the imagination of visitors, the qualities that define its modern identity, the unique features that make Albania unlike anywhere else. One of the most distinctive and immediately visible aspects of Albania is something utterly peculiar: bunkers. Hundreds of thousands of concrete military bunkers dot the entire landscape, from mountain peaks to sandy beaches, from city streets to remote valleys. These mushroom-shaped structures were built during the communist era by dictator Enver Hoxha, whose paranoia about foreign invasion reached extraordinary levels. He believed Albania needed to be prepared for attack from every direction, and so the country was transformed into a fortress. The bunkers remain, a ubiquitous and bizarre reminder of that isolated past. But Albanians have responded with creativity and humor. Some bunkers have been painted in bright colors, transformed into small cafes or guest houses, turned into art installations, or simply incorporated into daily life. They're everywhere. You might picnic next to one, park your car by another, or find one serving coffee near the beach. These concrete oddities have become paradoxically charming symbols of a past that Albanians have moved beyond but haven't forgotten. When people think of Mediterranean beaches, they typically imagine Greece, Croatia, or the French Riviera. But Albania's coastline, particularly along the Ionian Sea, has been called one of Europe's best-kept secrets. The Albanian Riviera is renowned for stunning natural beauty, crystal-clear turquoise waters, dramatic mountain backdrops that plunge directly into the sea, and beaches that range from white pebbles to golden sand. Places like Ksamil, with its small offshore islands that you can wade to, or Dermi, perched on hillsides above pristine coves, are becoming increasingly famous. What makes these beaches particularly appealing is that they remain relatively undiscovered and wonderfully affordable compared to their more famous neighbors. The same beauty, the same Mediterranean sun and sea, but without the crowds and inflated prices that come with mass tourism. Albanian cuisine is gaining recognition among food lovers for its fresh, flavorful blend of Mediterranean and Balkan influences. The food here reflects the country's geography and history. Coastal areas serve incredibly fresh seafood. Mountain regions offer hearty meat dishes, and everywhere you find vegetables grown in rich soil under abundant sunshine. Signature dishes include tavakosi, a comforting casserole of baked lamb and yogurt that's both tangy and savory. There's byrek, those delicious savory pies made with filo pastry, filled with cheese, spinach or meat, perfect for breakfast or any time. The ingredients are simple but of exceptional quality. Olive oil, fresh herbs, locally raised meat, vegetables picked at peak ripeness. Albanian food doesn't rely on complex techniques or exotic ingredients. It trusts in freshness and tradition. Albania is globally recognized for something increasingly rare in our divided world: exceptional religious harmony. This is a country where Muslims, both Sunni and the mystical Bektashi Sufi order, Orthodox Christians, and Catholics have coexisted peacefully for centuries. Religious identity is acknowledged but rarely divides. Families sometimes include members of different faiths. Neighbors of different religions share meals and celebrate each other's holidays. This tolerance isn't just political correctness, it's deeply embedded in Albanian culture. There's a saying in Albania: the religion of Albanians is Albanianism, meaning that national identity supersedes religious differences. In a world where religious conflict seems intractable in so many places, Albania stands as a model of interfaith tolerance, and Albanians take great pride in this aspect of their society. Albania claims one of the 20th century's most beloved humanitarian figures as its own. Mother Teresa, born Anjeze Gongshe Bojakshiu to an Albanian family in Skopje, now in North Macedonia, became a global symbol of compassion and service to the poor. Though she spent most of her life working with the destitute in Calcutta, India, and became a Catholic saint, her Albanian heritage is a source of immense national pride. Tirana's international airport bears her name, and her image appears throughout the country. For Albanians, Mother Teresa represents their best values: compassion, humility, service to others, projected onto the world stage and recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize. The capital city, Tirana, has undergone one of the most remarkable urban transformations in Europe. Under its former mayor, Edi Rama, who later became Prime Minister, the city became known for an incredibly energetic and colorful revival. Buildings that had been uniform grey under communism were painted in vibrant, sometimes wild color combinations: bright yellows, oranges, reds, greens, creating a visual explosion that seemed to declare the end of the drab communist era. Public spaces were revitalized with parks, pedestrian zones, and gathering places. Today, Tirana is known for its cafe culture. Sidewalks filled with people drinking espresso at outdoor tables, a vibrant nightlife, a growing art scene with galleries and performance spaces. It's a dynamic city that feels young and energetic, constantly evolving, shedding its past, while creating something uniquely Albanian and thoroughly modern. In the remote north lie the Albanian Alps, known locally as Bieshket e Nemuna, which translates evocatively as the Accursed Mountains. These are some of the most dramatic and untouched mountain landscapes in Europe. Jagged limestone peaks, deep valleys, clear mountain streams, and traditional stone villages where old ways of life persist. The Albanian Alps are becoming a premier destination for hikers and trekkers seeking off-the-beaten-path adventure. Trails wind through spectacular scenery, largely unchanged by modern development. Villages like Thet and Valbona offer traditional hospitality in a landscape of wild beauty. For travelers tired of crowded tourist destinations, these mountains offer something increasingly precious: genuine remoteness, authentic encounters with traditional culture, and the kind of natural beauty that feels truly undiscovered. Albania is known for its language, Albanian, or Shqip as speakers call it. This language is linguistically unique. It constitutes its own independent branch of the Indo-European language family. Unlike other European languages that have close relatives, French and Italian, German and Dutch, Russian and Polish, Albanian stands alone. It has no sister languages, no close cousins. This linguistic uniqueness is a core part of national identity, a living link to ancient peoples who spoke Illyrian tongues that evolved into modern Albanian. The language itself sounds unlike anything else, not quite like its Slavic neighbors, not like Greek or Italian, carrying echoes of Latin, but transformed into something distinctly its own. There's a humorous footnote to Albania's communist history that often circulates online. During the extreme isolation of the Hoxha era, Albania claimed to have the world's second largest navy because it owned 2 submarines. Never mind that one of them barely functioned, or that other nations had hundreds of vessels. The propaganda of the regime counted differently. This absurd claim has become a meme, shared with amusement as an example of the paranoid, isolated regime's disconnect from reality. It's the kind of detail that makes people laugh, while also marveling at just how strange Albania's recent past truly was. Perhaps Albania's biggest reputation today is as one of Europe's last affordable and undiscovered tourist frontiers. Travelers speak of incredible value for money, accommodation, food, and experiences at a fraction of the cost in Western Europe. But it's not just about price. Albania offers rich history visible in ancient ruins and Ottoman architecture, stunning natural beauty from beaches to mountains, and a sense of genuine adventure that's harder to find in more developed countries. There's an authenticity to travel in Albania, a feeling that you're seeing places before they become transformed by mass tourism. Meeting people whose hospitality is genuine rather than performative, discovering hidden gems that aren't yet in every guidebook. For adventurous travelers, Albania represents possibility, the chance to explore, to be surprised, to experience a European country that's still writing its tourism story. These are the things Albania is known for today: bunkers and beaches, tolerance and tradition, mountains and Mother Teresa, a unique language and a transforming capital, and the promise of discovery. It's a country that has emerged from isolation and hardship with its identity intact, offering visitors and the world something increasingly rare: authenticity, beauty, and the excitement of places still becoming what they will be. As you drift towards sleep, imagine those colorful buildings in Tirana, the clear waters of the Riviera, the rugged peaks of the Accursed Mountains, and the quiet pride of a small nation that has endured so much and now welcomes the world to discover what it has to offer. Chapter 10: The Country Today. As our journey through Albania's story reaches the present moment, let us look at the country as it exists right now in 2026, a nation in transformation, balancing challenges with opportunities, building a future while honoring its complex past. Albania's relationship with the European Union defines much of its current political and economic life. The country is deeply engaged in the formal process of negotiating accession to the EU, a complex undertaking that requires reshaping entire systems of governance. The EU acquis communautaire, that enormous body of European law and standards, is being examined chapter by chapter. Each chapter represents an area of policy: judiciary reform, environmental standards, agricultural policy, competition law, and dozens more. These negotiations demand significant ongoing reforms. Courts must become more independent and efficient. Public administration must become more transparent and professional. Economic regulations must align with European standards. It's painstaking work, sometimes frustrating, often slow, but it represents Albania's chosen path. Integration into the European family of nations, acceptance of shared rules and values in exchange for access to the world's largest single market, and the benefits of EU membership. While political integration proceeds slowly, technological transformation has been remarkably swift. Albania has embraced digitalization of public services with impressive results. By 2026, the country is known for its advanced e-governance platform called e-Albania, which allows citizens to access hundreds of administrative services online. Need to register a business, apply for a permit, access your tax records, check your medical history. All of this can be done through the e-Albania portal, significantly reducing bureaucracy and increasing transparency. What once required visits to multiple government offices, waiting in long lines, and navigating opaque procedures can now be accomplished from a smartphone. This digital transformation has leapfrogged Albania past some wealthier nations, turning what was once a weakness, limited traditional infrastructure, into a strength by building modern digital systems from the ground up. The tourism boom that began in the early 2000s continues to accelerate. Albania is firmly established on the travel map as a premier destination for those seeking the Mediterranean experience without the premium price tag. Travelers arrive seeking beautiful beaches along the Riviera, rugged mountain hikes in the Albanian Alps, rich history visible in UNESCO World Heritage sites like Gjirokastër and Butrint, Ottoman-era architecture, and communist-era curiosities. They find exceptional value for money, accommodation, meals, and experiences at prices that seem astonishing compared to Italy, Greece, or Croatia just across the water. Perhaps even more valuable, they discover a country that hasn't been overwhelmed by mass tourism, where authentic experiences are still possible, where hospitality feels genuine, and where there's still the thrill of discovery. Albania has become the answer to the question, where can I still go in Europe that feels unspoiled and affordable? Energy has become another success story for contemporary Albania. Investments in hydroelectric power, harnessing the country's abundant rivers and mountain water sources, have made Albania a net electricity exporter, selling power to neighboring countries. But the energy transformation isn't stopping with hydroelectricity. Major solar farms are being constructed, taking advantage of Albania's abundant sunshine. Wind projects are coming online, particularly along the coast and in mountain passes where winds blow reliably strong. These renewable energy initiatives position Albania as a leader in green energy in the Western Balkans, attracting investment from companies and governments committed to the clean energy transition. In a world increasingly focused on sustainability, Albania's natural resources, water, sun, wind, have become economic assets powering both domestic needs and regional energy security. Yet alongside these successes, Albania grapples with a persistent challenge that threatens its long-term development: mass emigration. Despite economic progress, the country continues to experience high rates of emigration, particularly among its youth and skilled professionals. The pattern is familiar and heartbreaking. Young people complete their education in Albania, then leave for Germany, Italy, the UK, or North America, seeking higher wages and opportunities that still don't exist at home in sufficient numbers. This brain drain represents a significant social and economic challenge. It's difficult to build a prosperous modern nation when so many of the brightest and most ambitious young people see their futures elsewhere. Families are separated, communities hollowed out, and the country loses the very human capital it needs for continued development. This remains one of Albania's most pressing problems, a challenge that economic growth alone hasn't solved. The physical infrastructure of the country is being transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible a generation ago. Albania, in 2026, is a construction site on a national scale. The Vlora Airport is under development, a project that will bring international flights directly to the southern coast, making the Albanian Riviera even more accessible to tourists. Progress continues on the Blue Corridor, also known as Corridor 8, an ambitious transport link that will connect the Adriatic Sea to the Black Sea through Albania, North Macedonia, and Bulgaria. This isn't just a road and rail line, it's a strategic economic artery that will facilitate trade and integration across the region. New highways are being built, ports expanded, energy grids upgraded. The Albania of 2026 is noisier and dustier than it might prefer, but these are the sounds and sights of a nation building the infrastructure it needs for the future. Culture and creativity have found fertile ground in contemporary Albania. The Albanian Riviera and historic sites like the stone city of Gjirokastër have become popular filming locations for international productions, attracted by stunning scenery, relatively low costs, and improving production facilities. Meanwhile, Tirana has developed a vibrant art scene. Galleries showcasing contemporary Albanian artists, performance spaces hosting theatre and dance, music venues where everything from traditional folk to electronic music finds an audience. Cultural festivals attract both local and international participants. Albania is building a reputation as an emerging cultural and cinematic destination, a place where creativity thrives and where the cultural heritage of millennia meets contemporary artistic expression. Geopolitically, Albania's position has never been clearer or more secure. As a full member of NATO since 2009, the country plays a crucial role in ensuring stability in the Western Balkans, a region that has known too much conflict. Albania hosts occasional NATO exercises, provides bases and logistics support, and firmly aligns its foreign and defense policy with the alliance. For a country that spent decades isolated and vulnerable, NATO membership provides both security and a clear identity as part of the West. In a world where security concerns are rising and geopolitical competition intensifying, Albania stands clearly with its Euro-Atlantic partners. Albanian cuisine is enjoying a moment of international recognition. What was once known only to Albanians and their neighbors is spreading across Europe and beyond. Restaurants in major cities, London, Berlin, New York, are introducing international audiences to modern interpretations of traditional dishes. Tavekosi, that comforting lamb and yogurt casserole, appears on trendy restaurant menus. Kofte, Albanian-style meatballs, seasoned with local herbs, are finding fans. Byrek appears in bakeries alongside croissants. Food writers and culinary travelers are discovering Albanian cuisine's fresh ingredients, Mediterranean influences, and distinctive character. Albanian food is firmly on the international culinary map, no longer a hidden treasure, but an acknowledged tradition, with its own place in the world's diverse food landscape. And those bunkers, those hundreds of thousands of concrete mushrooms that dot every Albanian landscape, have undergone a remarkable transformation in meaning. Once, they were symbols of paranoia and oppression, physical manifestations of Enver Hoxha's fears and the isolation he imposed on his country. But their narrative has fully shifted. Today, they're seen as unique historical landmarks and quirky tourist attractions. Many have been painted in bright, cheerful colors, turning instruments of fear into canvases for artistic expression. Some have been repurposed. A bunker becomes a small cafe. Another houses an artist's studio. Yet another serves as a peculiar Airbnb accommodation. They've become, paradoxically, beloved oddities, things that make Albania distinctive. Tourists photograph them, artists incorporate them into installations, and Albanians have made peace with these strange monuments to a past they've left behind. The bunkers remain, but their meaning has been transformed by a nation that has moved forward while acknowledging where it's been. This is Albania today in 2026, a country negotiating EU membership while digitalizing its government, building airports and highways while losing young people to emigration, exporting green energy while importing tourists, transforming bunkers into art while transforming cuisine into a cultural export. It's a nation still in transition, still solving problems, still building and changing, but with clearer direction than at any point in its modern history. The challenges are real, but so are the opportunities. As you drift toward sleep, imagine this small Balkan nation perched between sea and mountains, working to build a future worthy of its long, complex past. A future connected to Europe, open to the world, confident in its unique identity, and hopeful about what tomorrow might bring. Closing a journey's end. And so our journey through Albania comes to a close. We began at the very beginning, standing on ancient shores where the Adriatic and Ionian seas meet the land. We traced coastlines and climbed mountains, followed rivers through valleys, and discovered a geography of remarkable contrasts. A small country containing multitudes of landscapes, each more beautiful than the last. We traveled backward through time to when the first humans pressed their footsteps into Albanian soil, when Paleolithic hunters gathered around fires, when Illyrian tribes built their hill forts and traded along the coast, when Roman legions marched down roads that still bear their mark. We witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms and empires, saw Byzantine churches rise and Ottoman mosques built beside them, watched as Albanian princes united briefly against overwhelming forces, and saw how ordinary people lived their lives through centuries of change and challenge. We walked through markets organized by the millet system, sat in secret schools where children learned their forbidden language by candlelight, stood in long queues under communist rule, and felt the earthquake of change when that old order finally crumbled. We've seen Albania transform from isolation to integration, from poverty to possibility, from a country the world barely knew to one that welcomes visitors from across the globe. We've discovered what makes it unique: its language that stands alone, its religious harmony, its bunkers and beaches, its mountains and its people. And we've arrived here in the present moment, where Albania continues its journey, building, changing, solving problems, seizing opportunities, moving forward while honoring all that came before. Albania's story is one of resilience. It's a story of a small nation that endured conquest after conquest, occupation after occupation, yet somehow preserved its identity, its language, its sense of itself. It's a story of people who adapted when they had to, resisted when they could, and never stopped being Albanian through it all. It's also a story of hope. Hope that isolation can give way to connection, that poverty can become prosperity, that the wounds of history can heal, that a country written off by others can surprise the world and itself with what it can achieve. As you drift deeper into sleep, let your mind wander one last time through these Albanian landscapes. Picture the sun setting over the Ionian Sea, painting the water in shades of gold and rose. See the peaks of the Albanian Alps catching the last light of day, their stone faces glowing softly before darkness comes. Imagine the lights beginning to glow in Tirana's colourful buildings, in mountain villages, in seaside towns along the coast. Think of all the people who have called this land home across the millennia. The Illyrians and Romans, the Byzantines and Ottomans, the princes and peasants, the poets and fighters, the emigrants who left and the ones who stayed, the young people building futures and the old ones remembering past. All of them part of this continuing story. All of them threads in the fabric of what Albania is and what it's becoming. Albania is a small country on the map of Europe, easy to overlook, often forgotten in the grand narratives of history. But as we've discovered tonight, it contains depths that belie its size, layers of history, complexity of culture, beauty of landscape, and strength of spirit. May you sleep peacefully, your mind filled with images of clear waters and ancient stones, of mountains that have stood for millions of years and cities being built for tomorrow, of a language that stands alone and a people who endure. Rest well, knowing that somewhere in Southeast Europe, between the mountains and the sea, Albania continues its journey through time, writing new chapters in a story that began long before recorded history and continues into an uncertain but hopeful future. Good night, and may your dreams be as peaceful as a quiet Albanian valley at dusk, as vast as the view from the peaks of the accursed mountains, and as full of possibility as Albania itself. Sleep well.